is John Cena!
I hurt my knees doing that. Crouching down underneath my table. But
that's what she said.
hey, that is seriously one of my all-time favorite memes. I send that shit to my little brother all the time. And it's 'cause it's so annoying. And I find John Cena so annoying, but like in the best of ways. Like he's that heel face that, you know what I mean? Like one of those guys you just love to hate. And I don't even watch pro. I've been watching. Have you ever followed What Culture Wrestling on YouTube?
No, nothing.
They're good. They're like a lot little factoids and stuff, like 10 ways the WWE should have done this, and 10 most surprising blah blahs, and 10 blah blahs. Like a 5-minute thing where you're walking your dog, you don't want to look at her butthole while she takes a shit. It's a pretty entertaining thing to do.
There we go. One thing, I mean, you gotta look at like WWF and like or WWE and the way they like handled the whole John Cena thing, and it's funny how like it was like he was that constant guy that was so good at everything and being the good guy, and it almost like you could almost see like the turn of the fan, and then they were once the diehard Cena fan to just being like, oh my god, not John Cena again. Boo.
Everybody's like hoping that he becomes a heel and everything because it's just so much of the same. I mean, when Hulk Hogan finally went heel in the NWO, people loved it, right? And so it's been like this thing, this ongoing thing where, you know, like after WrestleManias or stuff, you see and you know, the headlines come up and you're like, oh, well, did he turn heel yet? Nope. And you're like, I think it's from something like Mean Girls, but it's a meme that you see a lot where it's like, stop trying to make blank happen. Blank isn't going to happen. And I saw one about John Cena. It's like, stop trying to make him like a face. He's not going to go over with the diehards. Same with like guys like Roman Reigns, where you're like, fuck off. Like, I don't care.
Right.
And it's so funny because headlines were made that Seth Rollins, who's he looks like a smaller version of Roman Reigns. He apparently came back this weekend and attacked Roman Reigns. And people were like, oh my God. And men were lactating and the walls were sweating with perspiration.
Was Daniel Cormier crying somewhere?
Probably. And then he comes out the next night and turns heel and we're like, wrong guy. Should have been the other guy, the guy that nobody likes. When people cheered that he came out and attacked that guy, that means that we like the guy doing the attacking, not the guy being attacked.
I mean, it kind of makes you wonder if, like, the reason why they, like, stuck with Cena not being the heel so much as, like, you look at somebody like Randy Orton, who, like, came out being, like, the total badass guy in the beginning and somebody who was like the crowd favorite, and then he just became like this absolute D-bag that just like, you know, kind of like, I mean, it just seemed like a complete 180, and they were like, well, we have to kind of have like an antithesis of Randy Orton, you know what I mean? So we're gonna have good versus bad. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, remember, like, John Cena didn't start out a good guy. The whole rapping gimmick was not supposed to put him over. He had like a goon sidekick.
Right.
His finishing move was called the FU, and then his submission, the STFU. And, you know, he used to rap at other people's expense. And I actually met him in an airport after SummerSlam where Kurt Angle wrestled Brock Lesnar. And I got him to sign a program that I had. I don't even know where it is. I only got him to sign it because he was there. And I was like, hey, man, good work. And he goes, yeah, I got an album coming out. And I was like, no. That was like middle school. So if middle school me who had Liberty spikes and green hair knew better, I feel like you as a grown adult probably should know.
It's funny because I feel like there's a meme about that, like where it's like everybody knows that one white kid in high school who is always like, hey, I'm the next big thing. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know. It's
just
so
wait till my
all people came over. Like, he's not good. That's one of the things that's so funny about, like, there's like this like training camp video of like guys doing wrestling tutorials, and he's like the sidekick who helps out, and he's like, okay, now John, grab my arm. And it's like he just fucks up so much. It just makes me so happy. And then he's the one who did it. Like, all the people, of all like the amazing, talented wrestlers, it was him. Jean shorts, jorts. The jorts guy did it.
Jorts and some basketball shoes.
To tell me that Brian Kendrick and Paul London, phenomenal wrestlers, guys with these high-flying, wonderful techniques, guys like Dean Malenko, the man of 1,000 holds, never over that high. But the guy in jorts smoked you, and you will never amount to anything as good as John Cena within going in the WWF. It's like,
right.
Should we just give up on this podcast? Because I don't even own jorts. I don't think we can get successful.
You know what? I had jorts once upon a time, but it was just because I liked the jeans so much that I didn't want to get rid of them when they ripped completely at a certain point. So I just converted them. It's not like I bought jorts. I converted jeans into shorts. So I feel like I have some sort of, excuse.
Okay, Brian, we've talked about rebranding the show a couple of times to being just a general men's lifestyle podcast.
Right.
Show to dudes in jorts. Would you be on board?
I would totally wear them, absolutely, because they're comfortable as fuck.
Yeah, I think that we might have something there. So, I mean, we'd have something more than the world of MMA has in terms of news this week. Ayo, did you see how I tied it all together? BJ Penn, he admits to using an intravenous vicarious.
Right, but he doesn't say what.
Well, he just used an IV. I think it was like the kind that rehydrate and stuff. And what it's typically used for is helping people who are dying. But when you're a cheater, you use it to flush your system of all the icky stuff that comes up in drug tests. And the reason that they're banned is because of that reason. It's because you could be tested at any time. So the fact that you could flush your system at any time, his whole story of like, oh, I didn't know it was banned all year. What?
Right.
Is that an honest mistake? Did he really think that was going to fly? I'm sorry. You thought you could use an IV anytime. Hey, Brian, who was that guy who made fun of people for using IVs in the past? Was that VJ Penn? Did he say that he never used one in his whole career, and then he got caught using one after, like, practice one day?
Right.
He's in, like, the best shape of his life, too, right? The oldest he's ever been, right? So, by default, his testosterone level should be the lowest they've ever been.
I don't think you could technically get younger. So, yeah, I'd agree with you there.
So all points across the board, those are all true statements, right?
That's correct.
So the only logical conclusion is that he's probably cheating. So even though we didn't want to see him return, and then he did return, even though he got, investigated for the allegations of conduct with a female, and apparently nothing happened there. How many times can there be smoke but no fire?
Right.
Like, there are some things to consider here, and I don't know, like, for example, Chris Weidman. He's famous, but you don't hear people being like, he raped me. A cheater. Those kinds of things, you don't hear about him. So it's just, I'm not saying that BJ Penn is, but like, you wonder if it's either that some of these things are true, or if he just has the most vitriolic, absolute hatred from his fan. Like, because it's interesting, you have these just insanely passionate about him. And that's one of the things Brian and I were talking about earlier, was like, BJ Penn fans confuse me because I don't understand where they're coming from. How did any BJ Penn fan think he was going to beat Rory McDonald legitimately?
Right.
Even occur to someone. So they have this like blind patronage. Is it possible that there's like a bizarro version of them where people are just as like passionate about hating him, and those are the ones causing all this shit?
Like I said, earlier, like I feel like it's like, I don't know if it's necessarily just that blind fanaticism, or if it's like almost like an underdog thing, because it seems like so many fights that he's in, he is the blatant underdog. You know what I mean? So it's like whether people are just like, hey, I'm gonna go over Penn because I don't see him winning this, but who knows? You know what I mean? That's the way I kind of look at it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who, remember, lost to Lyoto Machida at heavyweight, who's always kind of made a career out of being the underdog. So there's something to be said there. What if he's planting all these things so that BJPenn.com gets more views? I thought that it was going to be weird if they broke the story. They didn't break the story, but they at least featured the story. That's got to feel weird, right? Like, hey, the namesake of our website, this news reporting website, he just got popped for a USADA violation. We cool though, right? Like, I still seem credible even though the fighter whose namesake I'm using is no longer credible.
That's funny. I didn't even think about that. It's got to be kind of awkward around the office.
Yeah, right. So should we change the name? Maybe BJPenn.net.
I'm sure BJ Penn probably fucking covers their bills, dude. The guy's so loaded.
The thing. Remember the guy who the allegations of the woman being raped? The guy who's her boyfriend was his business partner, and there was a whole thing, and he actually worked on BJPenn.com. That's one of the huge things that's just that whole thing, just a sordid mess, and I don't care to delve into it enough because I just don't want to give BJPenn.com the views, even though I've said their name like 5-6 times on this episode. It's just not a credible news resource, and I've heard so many bad things from other journalists saying, oh, this is not a credible source. They steal. They misattribute things. I took a couple journalism classes in undergrad and in community college, and I think that I have a high degree of ethics, Brian. So I'm just not going to do
it. Fair enough.
So what do you think about the new fight, which it was originally BJ Penn versus Dennis Siver. Then it was BJ Penn versus Cole Miller. And now it's Cole Miller versus Alex Caceres, who you might know as Bruce Leroy.
Right.
Compared to BJ Penn versus Dennis Siver, are you more than, less than interested in Cole Miller?
I'd say equal. It's one of those things where I feel like it's just across the board. I feel like there's been so many changes to make this fight happen where I'm just literally like, okay, can we just, the fight needs to end and then let's leave it at that. You know what I mean? Like, so many hands have been exchanged. I don't need to see anything else happen here.
I mean, I even posted today, like, Joe Silva, when he planned out UFC 199, he was like, yeah. And now he's like, okay. You lost your main event. You have a short notice main event where the champion is now a 10-1 favorite. This is BJ Penn, who was like the second biggest draw on the card. Kind of a bad night. Yeah, I'm more excited, honestly, for the Caceres versus Miller fight. I think it's going to be a more entertaining fight. It's a style that I enjoy. Go look at Alex Caceres versus Jimmy Hedges. That was one of my favorite fights in terms of like groundwork. It's just transition after transition, and it just real good flow to that fight. It was a lot of fun. I'm a big fan. So, Brian, you want to move on now?
Yeah. Let's what about, like, I haven't looked at the odds yet, but I mean, I just looking at like one of your memes you did earlier with Luke Rockhold Bisping, and apparently the odds are pretty fucking heavily stacked towards Rockhold, huh?
10-1, yeah. And so for those of you who don't know, next week we are going to be doing a special episode where on the broadcast we're going to do a countdown. Michael Bisping's ring name is The Count. And we're going to just recap his fights, because from the day that the fight was announced between him and Luke Rockhold, the rematch at 199, it was 17 days. Well, Michael Bisping has 17 UFC victories, all of which I think are pretty important and probative in looking forward to this upcoming fight. But 10-1 is pretty steep. it's, even as a Michael Bisping fan, even having just seen him beat Anderson Silva, it's a pretty rough go round. I mean, Anderson Silva would not beat Luke Rockhold in my opinion. So technically on Bisping's side.
So, question then. Where do we put our money on Bisping, and how do we do it? Because we should totally do that.
Well, when the fight happens,
You know what I mean?
That's
I mean, could you imagine, like, what was the Holly Holm Miesha Tate thing? Or
Ronda Rousey was, I thought it was
Holly Holm Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, I think that was a 7-1 favorite.
So
go ahead.
So 10-1, shit, you know, put down $200 or something like that. Bisping comes with like a flash knockout, and we're looking pretty good.
$2,000, I could live with that. So maybe it's possible. We'll look into it. I have a friend who does all of his gambling on British websites, and he doesn't actually use money. He uses
it's like Bitcoin or something. Huh?
Yeah.
I say, is it like Bitcoin or?
It's like YouBet, but then he keeps all of the money in the account, so he never brings it back. So it's technically not illegal. So he really uses it as a means of like a barometer for his accuracy in his gambling.
So
money back, sure.
Oh, okay. I get it. No. Interesting.
I mean, maybe if he goes on vacation there. You could probably buy stuff on Amazon with it if he keeps it in like an account. You can put it like in a Venmo. I'm not telling him what to do. Whoa, I'm not committing malpractice of any kind. I'm not condoning any of this and recommending. No, not happening.
All right, moving on.
This is on a special edition of the MMA Hour today. I have to say it's kind of convenient because we recorded today. I'm not saying that we had a scoop on that or anything, but where there's smoke, there's fire, right, Brian? But anyway, there was only the second time that Ariel Helwani has done an MMA Hour. The only other time being when Brian Stan announced his retirement in a kind of a surprising way. To have Nate Diaz on for an hour and some change. And it was a delightful little chat. Brian, I know it was at an awkward time of your day because you were getting off work, but I have some points that I wrote down, if you'll indulge me.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Nate Diaz says that the whole Floyd Mayweather hype is a means of distracting people from the ass whooping that he gave Conor McGregor. Agree, disagree?
Agree. Absolutely. I believe like it's kind of like just a whole lot of bark, and I'm going to try and make noise and completely discredit anything that has to do with the legitimate reason of how I got beat. You know what I mean? Exactly. It's childish, and I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't know. I don't necessarily blame McGregor for all of this that he's doing, because really, what else does he have to go off of? You know what I mean? What is he just going to be like? Okay, yeah, he legitimately beat me, and let's leave it at that. No. My name's Conor McGregor. I'm going to open my big, stupid mouth, and I'm going to say what I want.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And one of the things that Nate Diaz went on to say was, or actually, Ariel Helwani and Nate Diaz kind of, was that the UFC is using this as a masquerade to say, look, this Conor rematch, Conor's got another big fight. And so you really should take this Conor rematch and give him and it's just kind of pathetic. Like, I never wanted to see a rematch. It was decisive. It was fine. What I wanted to see was Conor McGregor merit at featherweight and fight some credible fucking featherweights. He beat Jose Aldo. Great. The other featherweights who would be a fight. And I get that the weight cut is hard, but guess what? You're the champion. So either nut up or shut up.
Yeah, and essentially, yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I mean, you bring up a good point, and it kind of makes me think that, like, it almost makes it seem like the UFC doesn't believe that a Conor McGregor Jose Aldo 2 would come out the same way. Like, it would be like a fluke, right? Because they're pushing Conor McGregor outside of the 155 weight class. Like potentially they could lose their champion.
Oh yeah, and lose the entire setup that they gave him. I mean, Dennis Seaver, who is Dennis Seaver in the grand scheme of things?
Right.
He was the guy that people were giving to BJ Penn as a gimme fight, a tune-up fight, so BJ Penn could return after years out of the octagon. And that's the guy who got Conor McGregor a title shot. This is a guy who, after a 9-month suspension for using steroids, had one win and then gave Conor McGregor a title shot. Are you butt fucking kidding me? How about Conor McGregor's other really notable win, Diego Brandao, who's not even in the UFC anymore, who's facing a 9-month suspension for marijuana, who's facing criminal charges? Like, really, that's the caliber of fighter that got this guy a title shot?
Right.
Defend his title. That's what should have happened. The idea that... Go ahead.
And then you look at, like, I mean, even the Mendez fight is like it should have like a giant asterisk next to it, because how many days did Mendez have prior to the fight? 11 days.
It was 11 days.
Yeah, that's not enough. So.
Yeah, and like obviously he has impressive wins. Like when he beat Dustin Poirier, that was fun. When he beat Marcus Brimage, that was fun. Like, they were exciting, they were entertaining. But the fact is that those weren't fights that like are becoming of a champion. And after you lose, he shouldn't be allowed to keep rambling around. Like that's
right.
Not the way it should be. He should have to fight. And I get what he's doing is staying up at that higher weight, and he's trying to establish himself and try and become more natural, like 170 and stuff. And that's fine and dandy. But guess what, Connor? I saw you on steak. I wasn't impressed. Get back on salad.
Right.
So the next
either
thing.
That,
what?
I was gonna say either that or just vacate the belt and go to 170.
Yeah, I mean, there are some great. Like, look at Ricardo Lamas versus Max Holloway. That's entirely meaningless because their champion isn't being a champion. He's not being active. He's in another weight class trying to scramble because he lost to that other weight class. So whatever. One thing that Nate Diaz said that was very amusing to me in his talk with Ariel was he talked about how the money he made for UFC 196 was not a payment. It was reimbursement for all of the fights that he didn't get paid on, and he hasn't been paid yet as far as what he deserves. I liked that a lot because he has been paid dog shit and a half since he's come into the UFC.
Oh, yeah.
Right, Brian?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's actually UFC should definitely owes him some back pay.
Another point that I really liked was when he like kind of went off talking about Cowboy Cerrone, saying how Cowboy needs to stop saying that he's willing to fight for free, fight anybody, anytime, because he's like, what about the people like me who will fight for money? And you want to, if they could, pay you to fight for, or have you fight for free, then what about the rest of us who need to make a living and all that stuff? It was kind of an interesting approach, but it's good. Like, over willingness to perform for the company isn't going to help you out in the long run. All you're going to do is have more shekels when you could just get one giant payday. I think is kind of the point that Nate was making.
Yeah, I mean, it almost makes it seem like there's a point that you don't want to be like the sheep of the UFC. Like, I'm just going to tell me who to fight, when to fight, and I'll fight. Instead, you got to make demand yourself. It's almost like people like Cerrone are I guess what would be the word I'm looking for, like making the fighters' side of things like worse than they are, like as far as like trying to negotiate things, because like he's like, give me anybody or whoever you want to put me up against, I'll fight, or this or that, you know what I mean? It's like you're taking like fighters who want to pick and choose who they want to fight and kind of try and negotiate like as far as like fighter pay and this or that, and then you have somebody like Cerrone who's saying, I don't care how much you pay me, I'll fight whoever. I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive to the fighter trying to make a living, like Diaz said.
Yeah, and then another point that he had made was that he didn't feel disrespected when Conor McGregor didn't show up at the press conference. In fact, he kind of understood the guy's position. Are you surprised? Because it seemed like they kind of had that pageantry that Nate was sitting out there, that he showed up, that he did this, that he did that. It comes out that Nate actually missed a ceremony that was supposed to honor him. Instead, they actually came to his gym and honored him a couple weeks later. But to be at that press conference, and Conor had a typical day of practice for all things that we've accounted for. Are you surprised that he wasn't offended, or do you think that a guy, given his experience and given his resistance with the media and his brother's resistance with the media, is a little bit more empathetic than most would be?
It kind of seemed like it would be surprising. I mean, I don't know. It seems kind of strange coming from Diaz, but that's just from personal experience.
Yeah. Then he talked about how GSP wants to fight him, and he seemed to have no interest in it, but he was very amused that GSP had interest in him because he's now a big name fighter. And then the one thing that I really thought was great was he, and I quote, "You're fired. We got a new guy. We pay $2,000." So pristine in its, because he was talking about like whittling away at the badasses, like having real fighters who are battle trained, battle tested guys, rather than bringing in new low level guys that you're going to pay a couple of those shekels to, and then kick out the door when they get beat a couple times in quick succession. Record, looking at his brother's record, looking at the Scrap Pack's record, and it makes sense that these guys are talking about the more broader martial arts themes and that sense of competition. And then the very last point that I wrote down was how he apparently has been confused with Nick so many times at this point, he's just stopped correcting people. And apparently people think that he actually fought Anderson Silva, and he just goes with it, which is awesome.
That's pretty good. That's really good, because I mean, coming from somebody who also has a older brother, that from time to time people confused me with my older brother, and growing up, eventually it gets to the point where you're just like, they're like, "Oh, what's up, Kyle?" I'm just like, "Hey, how's it going?" You just kind of roll with it. So yeah, I could definitely see where he's coming from. One question about the interview: Did Nate bring up the 209 tattoo at all? Did that even come into nothing? Huh?
No. He's spoken with John Anik, and John Anik has shown off the tattoo quite a few times. In fact, a fan tweeted it. I think it was either Kenny Florian or Brian Stan during one of the events that they were doing with John Anik, and they replied with a picture message showing John Anik sitting there with the sleeves rolled up in the 209, showing. Mad that we didn't. We both called Conor McGregor on that fight. I never would have expected the way that it went down. I thought we both acknowledged that Nate Diaz's jiu-jitsu was great and his boxing is fair, but just how ill-equipped Conor was going into that match was baffling. More people got on our case was last week or the week before about how we kept making excuses for that Fabricio Verdum, but when you have a body of evidence and something peculiar happens, I'm sorry, that's called logic, my friend. And when you looked at all of Conor's previous fights, throwing ham hocks at a guy who has the most endurance of any guy he's ever fought.
Right.
And he's like the most durable competitor, and he just thought,
throw your hardest left at me. I will gladly take it and then give you 3 or 4 more right back at you.
Yeah. And I thought that also Nate had mentioned the possibility of fighting Mayweather himself, but he was very humble and modest. And the point is that if you put a one-dimensional boxer in a boxing match, they'll excel. But if you put them in a mixed martial arts contest, sorry, buddy, you're gonna get put on your ass.
Right. I mean, and that's something that it's been talked about for years. You know what I mean? And it's always come down to, okay, yes, if there is boxing match, you guys will beat us. If there's an MMA match, we will kick your ass. So are you going to jump into our realm? Are we going to go over there? I mean, from the past experiences, it's been the boxers come into the MMA and they just get destroyed. So,
Yeah, one thing I thought that was really interesting was that Nate Diaz actually came kind of the defense of Conor, saying, yeah, well, he would get embarrassed less going into boxing than Floyd Mayweather would get embarrassed coming into MMA. And I think that's very true, because at least, he's boxing and striking, whereas good as my underwater basket weaving experience, because I have zero.
That's true. That is true. Absolutely. I agree with you.
So let's move on. Stipe Miocic is fighting Alistair Overeem at UFC 203, which is conveniently the UFC after my birthday. My birthday falls on UFC 202, so I'm watching very attentively to who the main event's going to be of that one, which on might very well be Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. But let's keep going. So what do you think of the Miocic versus Overeem fight, Brian?
After watching the Verdum fiasco, I like to think that Miocic is gonna keep this going, and I don't know. I feel like Overeem just kind of it seems like he overextends so much in his stand up, and it almost seems like every single fight he gets cut. Is that not fair to say? Like, I feel like he gets cut pretty easily. Overeem.
The superficial cuts, nothing like too hemorrhaging or anything.
No, absolutely not something heavy, but it seems like people get some shots on him, and then like, I don't know, for some reason I remember him getting bleeding a lot from the face in a lot of his fights. Anyways, I feel like Miocic has got some heavy hands, and I don't know. I'm going Miocic, probably first round. I don't see this going to the decision.
My new stance is going to root for whoever the champion is, hoping that they will create a title run champion for a long-standing period, because one UFC heavyweight champion to have more than 2 title defenses. So I'm going to root for Stipe. I think Stipe's got a very solid chance.
And they're fighting in Cleveland, which is his hometown.
But they were also fighting in Brazil when Fabricio Verdum got his head knocked the fuck off. So
true.
Let's move on. We've already talked about Diego Brandao. There's a former UFC and Strikeforce veteran who is also now a Bellator veteran named Zach Light, who is suing the company for wrongful termination and alleging that the company engages in, and they openly accept fraudulent medical documents, citing that a guy named Ryan Martinez had faked both blood and eye tests. This was reported by Bloody Elbow today. Brian, does that blow your head off your shoulders? This is a multi-million-dollar company engaging in capital fraud.
Potentially billion. I mean, hasn't that? I said potentially billions of dollars. I mean, hasn't the numbers been thrown around lately as far as a company possibly being sold or whatnot for like $1 billion or something, or $2 billion or something like that? Because you said multi-million-dollar company, and
well, I was saying
I
Bellator.
think
He's suing Bellator, so.
Oh, okay. I was thinking it was UFC for some reason. Well, no,
he fought in the UFC and in Strikeforce, and then ended up in Bellator. So yeah, he's suing Bellator, which I still think is worth a couple $1 million, even if
Right. But yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's like names on lists getting completely royally fucked. I mean, it's not just one. It's not just like one failure of like somebody messing up, right? This is like multiple layers of people getting like doing something very, very bad, and looking the other way. And it's not just it's kind of like we were talking about this in like completely crazy off topic, but like in my water treatment class, we were talking about Flint, Michigan thing. Right, with the whole like water and like horrible case of like the lead getting leaching into the pipes and totally messing people up like really bad, and like that's like somebody like falsifying documents, and then that's somebody's supervisor looking at the documents and knowing something's wrong and then not doing something, and then it just branches off from there. And I feel like, I mean, if there's any evidence towards on any of these allegations being true, then I mean, God, that's a big hit for Bellator.
Yeah, I find it also interesting. I don't know the merits of the case, but it is a California case, so I'm able to look into it a little bit further. But it's a wrongful termination case. Typically viewed as independent contractors. So there's a whole level there that I find very interesting as well. So I'll keep an eye on it and ear to the ground. Brian, politics are cute, but what men really want to talk about is Dancing with the Stars. Did you watch a single clip of Paige Van Zandt on Dancing with the Stars?
No, absolutely not. Nope. Nothing.
Even when it was on
I mean,
like my Facebook timeline, all I had to do was just not scroll any further. Couldn't do it.
yeah, I feel like in my head, I feel like in my head I had an idea of what it would look like, but that's all I really needed. You know what I mean? Like I didn't need to go any further than that.
She was wearing costumes and she was moving. It was nice, I'm sure. She was runner-up. Cool deal. Politics. Tito Ortiz. We've heard previously that he's a Trump supporter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bloody Elbow apparently today shows a video of Tito Ortiz build that.
Joining in a what? Sorry, you cut off.
That wall chant.
Are you kidding me?
Meaning that the guy who comes out to a cage with a Mexican flag is chanting with other people, build that wall. I'm sorry, what? Does that not expose him as a phony and a fraud and a terrible butt-fucking person? I'm the white kid. I'm the blonde-haired, blue-eyed white kid. I am what Hitler's wet dream was as far as Aryans go. And I am sitting here saying that Tito Ortiz is an ignorant, racist piece of shit. His own people to obtain monetary gain by overemphasizing his Hispanic culture. We have the same name. His first name is Jake. It ain't Tito. He used them, and now he wants to build a damn wall. He's an idiot. A profound idiot. Brian, from me, because I'm getting angry.
I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, it's stereotypical Tito fashion. Anything the guy does, it just, I mean, what's the phrase? No bad, what bad publicity is still good publicity, or I don't know how the fuck it goes. But anyways, right? You know, it's something that his name is in the headlines and gets his name generated around the websites, and I'm sure it feeds his giant head and it makes it a little bit bigger. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting too because he just like came out this last week and was like, "Oh yeah, if the UFC is sold to a Chinese company without Dana White, they're gonna be doomed." And it's like it's very real. It was rooted in some form of honesty, and then he comes out with this crazy bullshit. Like I just don't like him. Like if I could Dexter one UFC, former athlete, it would be him. I would saran wrap him to a table, and the rest is history.
You know who I would do?
Who?
The Stephen Bonner.
The American Psycho? How would you do that? How are you going to play him like that? His life sucks already.
Something about that guy, dude. I don't know. Okay, so like the whole like Tito Ortiz, Stephen Bonner thing, like I feel like I equally hated both of them, and I feel like Stephen Bonner just eked that one out. So
Brian, we might have to have a serious talk.
Whatever.
Like about your future on the show, because if you don't hate Tito Ortiz more than you hate Stephen Bonner, I mean, like Stephen Bonner's life sucks, dude. Like he got busted using steroids twice, jettisoned from the UFC, goes to Bellator, and then loses to Tito Ortiz. Like, your life can't get worse than that. Sued by Josh Koscheck. You remember that? When he did the Garbage Pail Kids rip-off shirts of like the Punch Buddies, and he did Osh Kosh Bagosh, and it was Koscheck. Sued him for making those shirts. His life sucks. He was Josh Koscheck's bitch. People remember the biggest UFC fight of all time is him versus Forrest Griffin, and he lost. Worse than that. The most famous fight of all time is you losing.
I still Dexter him. I'm sorry. It's just that's the way I see it. That's the way I see it.
All right. Well, can't promise that Brian will be back next week, folks, but I
Bye,
will be.
guys.
We'll be recapping Ultimate Fight Night 88, previewing whatever the hell else is coming up. Brian, do you have any closing remarks for the fans and followers on YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, wherever?
No, other than I look forward to seeing you guys next Monday for a recap.
Oh, yeah. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and pimp us out as if we were toothless hooker ladies who with loose morals.
Absolutely.
Join us.